All right, good afternoon. My name is Mike Beckham. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Simple Modern, and I'm going to tell you the crazy story of how we took $200,000 in bootstrapped funding and turned into an over $200 million a year business. Story starts with my two co-founders, Brian Porter and Micah Ames. We had worked together at a previous company, and one day over lunch, we started a dream: what if we started a pretty radically different type of company? We didn't know it then, but what it would turn into is an insulated drinkware company that sold all kinds of different varieties of drinkware for adult and kids. We sell through almost every major retailer that you can conceive of, both in the US and internationally. We've come to be known for being at the intersection of premium quality, affordable price, and style, like this cup that we're selling in Whole Foods right now. We've done almost $1 billion in retail sales in 8 years. And this week, in fact, we're doing a promotion where a lucky customer will receive our 50 millionth cup. And as a part of that, they'll get a cash prize. If you had told me we would sell 50 million cups when we started, I would not have believed you. But the most interesting part of the company is actually how we constructed it. We really did use the golden circle way of thinking in conceiving what this company would be and could be. We started with why. Why should this company exist? Why would we want to work there and go through all of the difficulty that comes with creating a company? And then we worked on, okay, how would we approach the market? What would we sell? What would be the tactics? But we started with why, and that led us to a very atypical mission statement: we exist to give generously. We conceived of a company that tried to impute generosity into every person whose life it touched. Certainly that's our team members, but it's also the community we're in. It's the customers that we serve. It's the partners that we work with. It's the nonprofits that we help to fund with the 10% of profits that we give annually. So what I want to do is, year by year, go through the last 8 years, tell you a couple things that happened, and then what I learned from it. And 2016 was the year that we launched the company. We needed to find product market fit. So the business literature basically says you should go for what are called blue oceans, places that are new categories or where there's fewer competitors. Red oceans are the opposite: lots of competitors, few profits because of all the competition. If that was our goal, we failed miserably. We launched into a category that had tons of competitors. It was considered a highly commoditized market to be in. Some of our competitors were over 100 years old. Others, like Yeti's one of the best consumer product companies that's been launched in the last 20 years. I am not being modest when I say people thought this was a terrible idea. We were bootstrapped for two reasons. One was because we wanted to do some pretty radically different things with the profits and the money, and the other is nobody wanted to give us any money. So that made it pretty easy. We had three key reasons that we thought we could be successful in this market. And I would say that one of the reasons we picked this market is, even though competition is scary, it was a huge market. And if you're going to go after a huge outcome, you're going to have to enjoy competition. So what were the three reasons we thought we could be successful? The first is we'd all been very actively engaged in growing e-commerce companies up until that point, and we'd spent much of that time fighting against Amazon. And by 2016, one thing was very obvious: Amazon was going to win. They were the 800-pound gorilla, and it would be a lot easier to build a company working with Amazon than it would fighting against Amazon. Guess where we started selling drinkware on Amazon? Right there. They're already a big company, $150 billion in annual revenues. But over the next 8 years, they would more than 4x their revenue. We had the right insight about our first channel, and we picked the right time. The second thing is that we realized drinkware would become an accessory category, like a watch or a handbag or shoes. That the functional part of the product mattered, but what would matter just as much is how it looked and the style element of it. This is what our listings look like today on Amazon. You can see that we've really leaned into different colors, different sizes. We do a lot of different things with licensing. And this especially fit with our channel of e-commerce and Amazon. We were able to use kind of the infinite shelf to try a bunch of different things, and that helped us to be able to find our initial customers and find product market fit. The final thing that we believed was that the market always has more demand for excellence. Think about Chick-fil-A. What's unique that they do? Nothing really. They sell chicken sandwiches, but they do it with a level of excellence that is unparalleled. From the my pleasure that you'll get at the counter to the amazing efficiency that they use when they are running their drive-thru, they do it at such a high standard that they are able to do more dollars in sales per location in 6 days than anyone else in casual dining does in 7. It reminded me of the 100-meter men's final in the Paris Olympics. This was the fastest race ever run. How fast was it? The 4th place, 5th place, 6th place, 7th place, 8th place finisher all ran the fastest time ever for their positions in a 100-meter race. And what I would argue is that the cumulative excellence of the group raised the quality of the product to where we were all engaged and couldn't get enough. And this is what I think happens in great industries and great categories. The amount of competition creates so many new ideas that it propels the category forward towards growth. And that's going to be part of our story, as you'll see. So as I mentioned, we were bootstrapped with $200,000 in funding, and a lot of the early years of the company were grappling with scarcity and feeling like we were going to constantly run out of money. One example of this, if you're familiar with our story, our logo, our first logo, is on the screen. And the reason why Microsoft Excel is next to it is that's where we designed our first logo, was in Excel. It was not some New York branding agency. And it's the best logo ever designed in Excel, which is kind of like damning with faint praise, because you should not ever, under any circumstance, use Excel for logo designing. The 4th person to join our team is in this picture. His name's Carson Rock. And we had no money to pay Carson. We couldn't pay ourselves. We didn't have an office. But we wanted him to join the team. And he agreed to join the team and work without pay for 6 months in exchange for equity. In fact, he took out a second mortgage on his house to be able to support himself while he worked with no salary. That's how scarce it was. We found out that people really wanted laser engraved. Did anybody get one of our laser engraved cups? Did we get a few of those? I think yesterday they were handing them out. There were more in the atrium. Well, we found out people wanted laser engraved cups, and we could afford a laser engraver, but we didn't have anywhere to put it. We didn't have a warehouse. So we put it in Carson's living room. And this is Carson on his deck working on a laser engraved order. We were constantly trying to figure out, how do we make every dollar go further? And the period taught us something that I think is a really important principle. Scarcity creates focus. So think about people who are going to the beach. They're interacting with light, if you think about it. They're going and laying on the sand, and the light hits their skin, warms their bodies, might even give you a tan. If you take light and you focus it with a magnifying glass, you can do even more. You can actually set things on fire with it. And if you take light and you focus it enough, you get a laser. And what we learned in those early years is that we had to focus. Every purchase order had to count. We had to make the best decision and say no to the good decisions. But it built a muscle that became invaluable as the company continued to grow and even as we had more resources. 2018 was all about figuring out the strategy of how we would get products to customers. As I mentioned, our first channel was Amazon, and something that happened at the end of 2017 really impacted our 18. Black Friday is the holiday where shoppers lose their minds, and the reason why it's called Black Friday is because for many retailers, it's the point that they go from having a loss for the year to being in the black. 3 days before Black Friday 2017, we woke up to our account on Amazon being suspended. Amazon at that point was 95% of the company's revenue and profit. We had taken every dollar, and I mean every dollar we could borrow or that we had to buy inventory to get ready for that year's Black Friday, and suddenly we did not know if we were going to be able to sell. It started what was easily one of the most stressful 48-hour periods of my life, and ended when Amazon unceremoniously reinstated our account without any reason why it had been shut down in the first place. But the message was received. We were way too concentrated in one channel. The other thing that we were noticing is that technology was going to be infused with the future of retail. All you have to do was go into a Target and watch how someone shops and how much a role their cell phone played in the process. We had been totally focused digitally, but we knew if we were ever going to become a household name brand, we were going to have to move into physical retail, and we had to get the right partner. We were convinced that was Target. It took quite a few months to convince Target that they actually wanted to talk to us, but when we did sit down with them, they were impressed by the fact that we'd exponentially grown our business online, and our pitch was really pretty simple. It was two things. The first thing was that we could stay on top of trends better than they could. We were digitally native. We were launching things online. We saw waves way out from the shore before they could see them. And the second thing was that their customer already was our customer. They just weren't buying from Target. They were buying from Amazon. And as I showed you in the graph earlier, this was a point in time when everybody was terrified of losing share to Amazon. Target agreed. A few months later, we were in stores, and it's a partnership that's still thriving today. 2019 was when I think we started to see the compounding returns that came from having a very different approach to building a team. If you ask me what team I root the most for, I would probably say the Oklahoma City Thunder. I'm like a kid in a candy shop. I grew up watching Jordan and the Bulls. I would have never guessed Oklahoma City would have an NBA team. And even though Oklahoma City is the second smallest market in the NBA, it's had the third highest winning percentage. How's that? The answer has really been the culture and the consistency of leadership that the organization has had. This is Sam Presti. He's the general manager, has been the general manager for the entire 17 years. The ownership group has been the same as well, and they've had very strong ideas about culture, and as a result, it's created a stable environment where the team can thrive. We took a very similar approach to building our organization, where relationships would be prioritized, where culture would be intentional. One simple example of this, out of the first 15 hires that I made for the company, I'd known all but one for a decade or longer. And I wasn't just hiring them because they were my friends. I was hiring them because I was so specific about the values and the culture that we were aiming at that I wasn't willing to take chances. I was looking for people where there was already a track record of those things being displayed in their lives. This is some of our leadership and how long I've known each of them today. And as you can imagine, that creates an uncommon level of trust and chemistry, which has allowed our team to thrive. This isn't just true about how we've approached internal team dynamics, but it's also true about how we've approached external partnerships. We do a lot of manufacturing in China, and I'm proud to say that that 50 millionth bottle that we gave away came from the same factory where we made our first bottle. So many American companies will treat international manufacturers transactionally. I'm working with you until I get a better price across the street, and then I'm over there. We decided to be relational instead of transactional. This meant dozens of trips to China. This meant celebrating the birth of our partners' children, having them to our homes, actually caring about them as people. So often we can be transactional, just trying to get something from people like we talked about this morning. We leaned in. Just one example of how we thought about it really radically differently. There are hundreds of people that work on our products that don't technically work for Simple Modern, but they're a big part of our success. So we instituted an annual banquet, and the entire purpose of it, we'll be doing it here in a month, is that we go to China to celebrate each and every person that's helped made the company a success. And all of this would really matter because, as you know, 2020 was incredibly disruptive. It was a year where we learned a lot about values at Simple Modern. At the beginning of the year, you see Wuhan there. The other red pen is where our primary manufacturing facility is at in Suzhou. And we started to get reports that something really disruptive was happening, and it might delay some orders. And as we tuned in, we realized this was much bigger than a small disruption when Wuhan was completely locked down. And as I looked at it, I said, well, if this is a virus, it's probably going to come over here. And we started making preparations that, hey, maybe we would have to work from home. Who knows? What I would have never guessed is that the epicenter of that would actually be Oklahoma City, where minutes before the tip-off of an NBA game, the game would be called off because Rudy Gobert tested positive for COVID-19. Later that night, the NBA suspended its entire seasons. We found out several other people had tested positive for COVID. 2 days later, we had stay-at-home orders and 30 days to stop the spread. And then things got super weird, right? This is Target. We learned there's essential and non-essential goods. And apparently buying non-essential goods was a public health risk. Here, Target has had to barricade the greeting card aisle. Who knows what danger lies behind that tape? Target called us later that week, and they said, we can't buy anything from you for the foreseeable future. It's all got to go to essential products. And then, a couple days later, Amazon, who was so overwhelmed with demand, Amazon took 80% of our catalog from one-day delivery to one-month delivery. Guess what happened to our revenue chart? Our revenue was dropping off a cliff. I had a great attitude in March. I was upbeat. I was resolute. I think it was in April that I had the first night where I asked myself the question, are we going to make it through this? And it's interesting because we started this company on some pretty lofty ideas. I mentioned the generosity piece earlier. But I realized that that was really going to be put to the test. We were going to have to make some decisions about what we really valued. Richard Feynman has a great quote. He says, the first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool. We all have stories we want to tell ourselves about what we value, about what we prioritize. But we get a gift when we get moments where it's really difficult to prioritize those things, because those moments teach us how our scales are really weighted. And for us, we looked at the surrounding world and we realized that the need was about as high as we had ever seen. This is unemployment claims in Oklahoma, and we were by no means unique. This was happening all over the country. And we realized that if we were going to be a company that was really dedicated to generosity, this was exactly the point where we would want to do something at the very moment that our financial future was the most uncertain. So we leaned in. We pulled forward all of our giving for that year, some of the following year. We found every bottle that could be given away, and we gave them away to frontline workers. And I'm not going to pretend that we made any kind of meaningful dent, but we found a lot about ourselves out. And it was at that moment that it was clear to me that it was sincere, that what we said we were about is what we were really about. As we moved into 2021, I would say it was like driving in a really deep fog, where you just did not know what was coming next. At the beginning of the year, something great happened. Walmart approached us and said they were so impressed with the brand that they wanted to have it on shelves. We launched into Walmart's nationwide later that year. And right as we were in the process of being excited about that, what that meant for the brand, we had a massive setback. This is a picture of one of our water bottles' straw lids. And the little valve that it's pointing to has two purposes. One is to prevent water from coming out of the bottle when it's like on its side. And the other is when you are sucking on the straw for air to go in so you can get water out. Our manufacturing partner, in an effort to make this valve better, had made a change. And unbeknownst to them, when you ship it in a container and it gets hot and cold and everything that happens in a container, the valve would get stuck. And we realized we had 1 million bottles with defective valves that had shipped. We set off a massive rework campaign. Now, one of my theories about the world is that the world's weird for us because we talk about numbers like we understand them. I talk like I understand what 1 million bottles looks like. 1 million bottles is an inconceivably large amount of bottles, and we had to take every individual bottle out. We had to, with a toothpick, poke the valve out, then thread a new valve in, then repackage it one. This is what the floor at one of the workstations looked like halfway through the day. Everybody was a part of the rework, and it took 3 months, but we fixed all 1 million bottles. One of our teammates during this period asked if he could decorate his cubicle. I said yes. I had no idea what would ensue. That is a hardwood floor that he laid on top of carpet. He hung a chandelier. I made the mistake of posting this on Twitter, and I experienced what true virality was like. 22 million views just on Twitter. Then people took it to the other social media platforms. It was insane. Another first for that year is I was featured in the Wall Street Journal for the first time, not for a topic I would have guessed. It was actually something I knew nothing about years before. It was supply chain. And what I was basically quoted as talking about is that the supply chain was showing significant cracks, and that would be a big theme of 22. And what I learned from this year is that we want to think when we're in business that we're like some speedboat captain, that we get to decide where we're going and we get to pilot the ship, but we're really a lot more like this guy. Like a river rafting guide. The river is in control, and we do our best to adjust to it. And if you ever forget that, something like COVID will remind you. 2022 was the hardest year I've ever experienced in business. It was like running directly into a 40-mile-per-hour wind the entire year. At the beginning of the year, you can see what started to happen across basically every part of our business. This is shipping container prices. That's a 10x increase in a few months. But the good news is they weren't just 10x more expensive, but they were like a third as fast. So this is a shipment, a GPS. The ship comes over, tries to go into the Long Beach port, is turned away, and goes on some kind of hellish joy cruise up around the Long Beach coast for 90 days. Try planning that in your supply chain calculations. It was so bad that it became part of popular culture that the supply chain was breaking. And it's one of those pieces that you just assume it's going to work until the moment that it doesn't work and you realize maybe it was more fragile than you thought. As all this is happening, the exchange rate between the dollar and the Chinese RMB all of a sudden changed a lot. The dollar weakened, which basically means if you're importing products, they're all of a sudden a lot more expensive. But the good news is there were also tariffs, and so that was bad as well. The retailers couldn't manage their own supply chains because they were all broken. We had a retailer tell us that they couldn't order for a 3-month period because their fulfillment centers were so full of air fryers and Christmas trees that they literally could not get product through. This led to tons of markdowns, overstocks, and even some companies that had been very successful at the beginning of COVID going bankrupt. All of it accumulated to the worst inflation the country had seen in 40 years. It was a terrible environment to be in retail. Our response was to open some domestic manufacturing. We still have it in Oklahoma. We designed some pretty cool stuff. This is an automated lid assembly line for some of the things that we were manufacturing for Walmart. And as we got to the end of the year, we took stock of our net income, and it was about $10 million. And in a vacuum, that might seem like a good number, until you realize that it was down about 22% from the year before, and we were 55% lower than what we had thought would happen just at the beginning of the year. And I cannot tell you how discouraging it is to work so hard to try and scale and feel like you're going in reverse. As we were going into 23, it reminded me of this banner. Running a business is hard. Can I get an amen? We are all borderline neurotic for doing it. 2023 was like a perfectly timed reverse in a football game. The defense is all flowing one way, and then boom, it's going the other way. And every single one of those headwinds that we had been dealing with all of a sudden turned into a tailwind. It started with one of our competitors launched a product that went mega viral. This is the Big Dumb Cup, as Saturday Night Live would sell it. This is the Stanley Quencher. And it went so viral. How viral did it go? Well, on Amazon, in the first quarter, it was the third most searched for item. It was ahead of toilet paper, if that tells you anything. You saw crazy stuff happen, like end caps that would sell out in minutes at places like Target. And this wasn't just happening with Stanley, it was the entire industry. We launched a competing product that we thought was a better mousetrap, and pretty quickly, social media users agreed, and we had our own videos that were going viral showing how superior our product was. As a result, the entire industry was exploding. You remember that 100-meter final example I gave earlier? That's what was happening here. Our industry went from $4 billion to $5 billion in a year in U.S. retail sales. That's 25% growth at a time when everything else in housewares was completely flat. And as that was happening, the exchange rate, the dollar strengthened to the highest level it had been in, 16 years. It was cheaper than ever to import from China. And ocean shipping rates shockingly collapsed to be below pre-COVID levels. We started to see famous people sharing our product online. We were experiencing what it's like to really become a household name. And we leaned into it. We did holiday collections. Some of these sold out in minutes or hours, producing spikes of tens and hundreds of thousands of dollars of revenue. We were in a full-on craze. If you look at our EBITDA by year, it would look something like this. We experienced a 4x increase in EBITDA from 22 to 23. But you know, what's interesting is I think this red line is a better indicator of the value we'd really created. And the reason why I point out the red line is that in 2022, our performance was significantly worse than I think the value we were bringing to the market. But then the opposite happened in 23. Our performance was way better, probably, than the value we'd created. And what I learned from the process is that part of being a good operator is focusing on the red line and not the black line. There's the things you can control, and then there's the noise of the market. And being a good operator starts with focusing on creating value and trusting that in time the market will recognize it. For me, 2024 has brought my 45th birthday, and it has been about standing at the crossroads of life and thinking about clarity of purpose. The success of Simple Modern has brought awards, speaking engagements, financial abundance, and yet the thing I find myself thinking about is the dog I had growing up. Misty was a mutt my parents bought when I was still in the crib. Great first dog, had one massive quirk. She loved chasing cars. So much so that she was known to jump 8-foot fences or crash through screen doors that stood in her way. I always wondered, what did she think would happen if she caught a car? Another staple of my childhood was the Far Side comics. Gary Larson had an irreverent and quirky sense of humor that resonated with me. I had all of his compilation books. And in one of his compilation books, he talked about his most controversial comics. And interestingly, at the top of the list was a comic about this very issue. What do dogs think will happen if they catch a car? And he entitled it When Car Chasers Dream. In it, the dog stands victoriously over the car, howling at the moon. And apparently at no point did Larson or his editors realize that it looks like the dog is very romantically engaged with the car, which significantly changes the implied meaning of the cartoon. Why do dogs chase cars? It seems so silly until we realize that we can spend much of our life doing the exact same thing. Chasing after money, success, status, without knowing why or what we would do if we caught them. I know this because I am a recovering car chaser. Many years of my life were spent chasing after things because of the challenge or because of the way I thought it would make other people look at me if I succeeded in catching them. And I'm not alone. In fact, the Bible has an entire book that is written by a car chaser thousands of years ago. Here's what King Solomon says. He says, I amassed silver and gold for myself, the treasure of kings and provinces. I acquired male and female singers and a harem as well. Apparently Solomon had over 700 wives. The delights of a man's heart. I became greater by far than anyone in Jerusalem before me. And all this, my wisdom stayed with me. I denied myself nothing my eyes desired. I refused my heart no pleasure. My heart took delight in all my labor, and this was the reward for all my toil. So Solomon catches all the things he's been chasing after. And he takes a step back to think and reflect on how it makes him feel. And here's what he says. Maybe. Yet when I surveyed all that my hands had done and what I had toiled to achieve, everything was meaningless. A chasing after the wind. Nothing was gained under the sun. Now, we don't know if Solomon was melancholy because he had 700 sets of in-laws. But we do know that he caught all the things he was after, and he found it deeply unfulfilling. Like a chasing after the wind. So what's my point? That's fruitless to run after anything? Not at all. In fact, one of my strongest beliefs is that living life well starts with chasing after the things that are truly worthy of being pursued. So that's the question I've been asking myself. What am I chasing? What are you chasing? We get so little time that we should invest it in things that are worthy pursuits. And when I think about the parts of my life that really have enduring meaning, I think about relationships and moments like when my family met my son. I think about the 21 years I've spent with my wife. I think about the joy and the friendship I've experienced with my business partners. Together, we've experienced the highest peaks and the lowest valleys that come from building a company. I think about being part of a team that's much more than coworkers, where relationships and character have mattered just as much as competency. I've learned that there's no substitute for strong culture. Culture is like a garden. It only thrives when everyone picks the weeds, everyone waters the plants, and everyone fertilizes the soil. It's rare, but when it happens, it's powerful. I've learned that money isn't the point of business. It's simply the byproduct of healthy companies. We only use it as the scoreboard when we lack something more compelling to chase after. It's just a tool, but it is a powerful one that has the ability to improve our communities and coworkers' lives. That's why Simple Modern recently became an ESOP. Every team member owns a piece of the company they're helping to build. The day we announced it, my favorite response was from Megan. She said, "For generations, my family has been poor, but for the first time, I see a different path that's possible for me and my children. Capitalism has been a tremendous force for good, crushing global poverty over the last 200 years. This is the legacy we inherit." And the question that we face as our generation takes the baton, the question that will define us and with which history will judge us, is how will we use our power and position? Will we use it simply to enrich ourselves or to enlarge the future for everyone? Simple Modern exists to give generously, giving over $10 million to things like fighting human trafficking and providing clean drinking water. And we're just getting started. I know in the years ahead, we can do so much more than that. That's our mission. But what's your mission? Because the world is starving for leaders who will stand up and cast a vision of something worth fighting for and something worth working towards. We have both the opportunity and the responsibility to use our resources and our talents and our companies to be leaders that make an impact for good, not just for others, but for ourselves. So that at the end of our life, when we're taking stock of how we've used our precious time, we'll know that we used it in worthy pursuits and not chasing cars.